This is BBC News with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. The UK Prime Minister puts the brakes on further easing of lockdown restrictions due to come into force in England tomorrow. Bowling alleys, ice rinks and casinos will now not open. Small wedding receptions won't be allowed either. Boris Johnson said it's necessary in order to deal with a rise in infections.
I won't stand by and allow this virus to threaten to cause more pain and more heartache in our country.
More than 4 million people in northern England can no longer visit other people's homes or gardens after the sudden imposition of new restrictions.
It's just hard to know really how to move forward and how coming out of this lockdown is what's going to happen really.
Top infectious diseases expert in the United States tells lawmakers that US lockdowns have been less strict and less effective than those in Europe. After 3 months without any new infections, Vietnam now reports its first 2 deaths from COVID-19. And one of Britain's most acclaimed film directors, Sir Alan Parker, has died at the age of 76. Hello and welcome if you're watching in the UK or around the world. Please do stay with us for the latest news and analysis from here and across the globe. A further easing of England's lockdown, planned for tomorrow, has been put on hold because of a rise in the rate of coronavirus infections. The Prime Minister said that this was time to squeeze the brake pedal. He warned that the country cannot be complacent. Mr Johnson said that face coverings will now need to be worn in more places where you come into contact with people you don't know. The decision means that bowling alleys, skating rinks and casinos cannot reopen tomorrow, and certain beauty treatments involving the face cannot go ahead for at least 2 weeks. Wedding receptions of up to 30 people and indoor musical and theatrical performances will not be allowed either. You'll have to wear a face covering in cinemas, museums and galleries, as well as places of worship from the 8th of August. England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chief Whitty, says the country has probably reached the limits of what can be done in opening up society. Here's our political correspondent, Leila Nathu.
Poised to stage a performance for the first time in months, this venue in London was due to open its doors tomorrow.
80 seats, normally 180, and now we can't open. And that's a huge financial hit for us here at the Phoenix.
Businesses still closed across England have been waiting for the next phase of unlocking to begin. But now, with cases of coronavirus on the rise again, the Prime Minister pressing pause.
At every point, I have said our plan to reopen the society and the economy is conditional, that it relies on continued progress against the virus, and we would not hesitate to put the brakes on if required. With those numbers creeping up, our assessment is that we should now squeeze that brake pedal.
And so?
On Saturday, the 1st of August, you'll remember, we had hoped to reopen in England a number of the higher risk settings that had remained closed. And today, I'm afraid we're postponing those changes for at least a fortnight.
Boris Johnson acknowledging the disruption this will cause.
I know that the steps that we're taking will be a real blow to many people, and I'm really, really sorry about that, but we simply cannot take the risk.
That apology aimed at people like Luke and Vicky, whose wedding reception in Chorley, already slimmed down, has now been cancelled.
You have dreams of what your wedding's going to look like, and them dreams have already been shattered. So once we heard about this a week before our wedding, then it was devastating and obviously very upsetting.
Although employers are still being encouraged to think about how to get people back to work and advice on shielding will still come to an end, face coverings will now be required in more places like galleries, cinemas and museums.
How worried are you that this is going to turn into a surge? And why is it that we find ourselves in this position? Because the government's message has been unclear and inconsistent, or are we all to blame?
We're now seeing a warning light on the dashboard. It is right to respond in the way that we are. The answer lies with all of us following that guidance.
But from a man who's always struck a cautious tone, a stark warning about the challenges to come.
We have probably reached near the limits or the limits of what we can do in terms of opening up society. So what that means, potentially, is if we wish to do more things in the future, we may have to do less of some other things. And these will be difficult trade-offs.
As well as juggling what's happening nationally, targeted local restrictions, like those imposed in the northwest of England last night, are also here to stay. Scotland's First Minister now advising against all but essential travel to the areas affected.
But we see this as being an important and necessary precaution. Our advice is, of course, designed to minimise the risk of spread from England into Scotland, but it is also designed to assist people in these parts of England.
And Labour questioning how the message was relayed.
Right decision, very poor communication, that's got to improve. We're going to see more of these situations over the coming weeks and months. The government needs to learn the lesson of the last 24 hours, which is improve the communications.
Still empty spaces, still tables unfilled. The government says it's now up to us to stick closely to the rules so lockdown easing can resume. Leila Nathu, BBC News.
Let's speak now to Professor Gabriel Scally, member of the independent SAGE group of scientists. He's also President of Epidemiology and Public Health at the Royal Society of Medicine. Professor, Chris Whitty, we saw earlier today, said the country has probably reached the limit of what it can do to open up. Do you agree?
Well, I don't know what the strategy is, really. I think the government hasn't had a strategy really since March, when they produced the last one. They did produce a strategy about easing the lockdown, and that hasn't gone terribly well, as we can see now. So I'm not sure what the overall strategy was. I remember Professor Whitty telling us about herd immunity at one stage. So what we need from the government is a clear strategy about how we're going to see through the next 6 to 9 to 12 months. And I would argue that that strategy should aim to get the number of positive coronavirus cases down to zero, or as close to zero as we can get the virus under control, because it quite clearly is not under control at the moment.
How do you do that?
Well, the testing and tracing system is incomplete. We need to really convert that to a much more dynamic and quick-acting system based locally, very strongly based locally, because we see that the real answer to these local flare-ups is local action, and that means local finding cases, testing, tracing, and isolating, but also supporting people who are being isolated. So strengthening those local arrangements, maintaining social distancing, and I think some of the messaging has been very poor. I've been a public health doctor for a long time now, and I know that in these circumstances, it's clarity of message that matters and consistency of message that matters. And I'm afraid we haven't had that. And I think the public are very confused about what the rules are at any one point in time. And then we need to get our priorities right. And I don't think opening pubs, gyms, and nail bars really counts ahead of reopening schools and getting children back into education. And I really worry about this stop-start approach, because the government has never really got ahead of this virus. They need to get ahead of it instead of playing catch-up, because that's a game they play very badly.
Let's look at that point you alluded to. September's coming up. School pupils might expect to return. Is it going to be a simple trade-off in your mind between pubs and schools?
It could come down to that. I think we know enough to know that alcohol is a really effective spreader of this virus, because it reduces people's inhibitions. And after a few drinks, social distancing will hardly matter. And there's so many around the world, so many serious outbreaks that have been linked to reopening of venues where alcohol is provided. So I think alcohol in those sort of venues, in pubs and in clubs, should be really at the bottom of our priority list, and the education of our children, and making schools safe for the children, safe for the teachers and staff, and that will let parents go back to work in our economy, which we need. So, but overall, I think The whole strategy, and this is what Independent Sage has been saying consistently for some weeks now, we need a strategy to get us to zero. That's the strategy they're following in Scotland, and it looks very much like it's working in Scotland. And that's what we need to adopt for the whole of the United Kingdom.
You've talked about the importance of having a clear message. So in one sentence, preferably 6 words or less, can you describe the exact message that you would like?
All of us must do everything we can to get the numbers down to zero. We need to get rid of the virus, not learn how to live with it, because you can't live with a deadly virus.
Professor Gabriel Scally, that was a little bit more than one sentence, but we'll allow you that. We'll allow you that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Staying on the subject, in Wales, swimming pools, gyms, leisure centres and indoor play areas will be allowed to reopen from the 10th of August. Up to 30 people will be allowed to meet outdoors, and children under 11 will also not have to social distance from Monday. Licensed wedding venues will be able to reopen from Monday, but receptions will need to be outdoors. The First Minister, Mark Drayford, admitted that new lockdown restrictions in the northwest of England had given him pause for thought. The man leading the US efforts to contain coronavirus, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has been giving evidence in Washington at a congressional committee looking at the handling of the pandemic. For 3 hours, health experts were pressed on COVID-19 vaccine development, school reopenings, and the efficiency of President Trump's response to the virus. Let's hear some of Dr. Fauci's comments.
We hope that as the time we get into the late fall and early winter, we will have, in fact, a vaccine that we can say would be safe and effective. One can never guarantee the safety or effectiveness unless you do the trial, but we are cautiously optimistic that this will be successful. If you look at what happened in Europe when they shut down or locked down or went to shelter in place, however you want to describe it, they really did it to the tune of about 95+% of the country did that. When you actually look at what we did, even though we shut down, even though it created a great deal of difficulty, we really functionally shut down only about 50%.
I've been speaking to our correspondent in Washington, Barbara Plett-Usher. She gave me her assessment of Dr. Fauci's testimony.
This is the committee that investigates President Trump's response to the pandemic. And the Democrats wanted this hearing because they say there's no unified national response. And that's the reason why the country has struggled so much to contain the virus. The Republicans, on the other hand, have said that's a political narrative. There is a plan. In fact, these public health officials have written up reams of guidelines which have been sent out to the states on how to reopen the economy, which have been followed in a sort of patchwork way. But they have also, in this committee hearing, used their political views to approach topics that are controversial. Why whether it's safe to reopen schools, whether the political protests have led to a spread of the virus. And some of the Congress people have sometimes turned to the health officials to kind of bolster their political narrative. And I have to say, James, that we've been hearing a unified message from those who are testifying. I think they may have coordinated ahead of time. They keep saying, just make sure you wear masks, make sure you wash your hands, make sure you social distance, and stay out of crowds. And if you did that, it would have the same impact then as if we would shut down the economy again.
Looking at the spread of the virus, it's going through red states, Republican voting states. How might that influence the election?
Well, I think it is already influencing the approach of the campaign. You've had a number of battleground states have been affected by the virus, and polls show that there's a drop in support for President Trump because of the way the White House has responded. And I think the campaign team has stepped up to that, and that's why you're seeing the renewal of the briefings, the coronavirus briefings. That's why you're seeing President Trump take a more serious tone sometimes when he talks about the impact of the virus. That's why you're hearing more and more about vaccines and therapeutics, because that's an emphasis that he wants to make. But even still, you still get that mixed messaging. For example, it was on display in the committee. Dr. Fauci was asked to respond to a real-time tweet from President Trump in which he said the U.S. has a higher infection rate than Europe because we do more testing. And Dr. Fauci had to say, well, no, there are a number of reasons why the U.S. has a higher infection rate, and that rate is real. So as long as there isn't a unified message coming out, it's very hard, I think, to have a unified response. And so that could play into the election.
Barbara Plett-Usher there. The World Health Organization has reported a record increase in global coronavirus cases. The total has risen by 292,527. The biggest increases have been from the United States, Brazil, India and South Africa. Deaths have risen by 6,812. Back now to the UK. People living in Greater Manchester and in parts of East Lancashire and West Yorkshire can no longer visit another household in their home or garden. Support bubbles are exempt from this rule. Police will have the power to enforce these new rules. You can still go to pubs, restaurants and shops in the affected areas as well as places of worship, but only with your own household. It comes after a jump in new infections in the past week in almost every part of Greater Manchester. The highest levels have been in the city of Manchester, in Trafford and Oldham, from where Judith Morris reports.
From Stockport to Bradford, Rochdale to Huddersfield, 4 million people are living under new restrictions. Infection rates have been high in the north of England, but the announcement late last night still came as a shock. In Oldham, the Ali family were supposed to be celebrating Eid at home with visiting relatives. The food was all prepared. Now the party would be illegal, the guests aren't coming.
Devastating, to be honest. Like a few hours before Eid starts, you're getting told, oh no, you can't do anything. It's really upsetting. We did expect more. We do think we've been tagged, but we can't really.
Do you think that this timing was chosen because of Eid to stop family gatherings, large gatherings?
We do feel like it's been quite unfair, but it's just, we feel like it's been quite insensitive of them, the people making the decision. It's the short notice that's really triggered people.
And it's not just celebrations at home which are affected, but the chance to party elsewhere with friends.
At night I would have probably gone out with my mates, out to Wimsor Road or wherever in Manchester, but it looks like them plans have changed as well, going to have to stay inside.
Over in Bradford, community elders aren't questioning the restrictions, but are angry at the last-minute timing.
I paint you a scenario. It's 9:30 on Christmas Eve. You've put the turkey in the oven and then you see a Twitter feed which is telling you that Christmas is cancelled. So yeah, disappointing, anger, at the lack of notice really.
Here in Oldham, the infection rate has risen more sharply in the last week than anywhere else. It's now more than 10 times the average for England. And there have been sharp rises in other northern communities too. Local leaders say they accept the restrictions, but they've criticised the government for its communications, saying local people feel confused and distressed.
It sends mixed messages to people in Greater Manchester. On the one hand, they're hearing that new restrictions are being imposed. On another, they're hearing that some of the support they've been receiving to stay at home and do all the right things is being withdrawn.
In Oldham, there's a mixture of resignation, irritation and confusion.
I was supposed to be going to mates like at a party, but yeah, too many people are going to be there and I'm not risking it.
Has it been cancelled?
Yeah.
It seems like it's because of the economy that they're doing it. So it's all right to go out, spend your money, do what you need to do, but don't mingle. So it's like, how do you expect people to not mingle when you're leaving them the free choice to go to the restaurant?
The rules mean that people from the restricted areas can't travel to visit friends in other places. Nina and Kieran have cancelled their holiday.
The difficulty has been not that we're not allowed to go on holiday anymore, it's been the fact that the information has been delivered in such a way that it's hard to know whether, right, is this a firm, we're cancelling it? Are we allowed to be in a house together when we're not in Greater Manchester? You know, that it's been so unclear.
Back in Oldham, the Ali family may not be able to celebrate Eid as they wanted, but they're not letting that stop them from staying in touch. Even online, they're determined to be together. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Oldham.
Well, let's just bring you right up to date with the latest figures from the UK government. We've been told by the UK government that in the past 24 hours, 120 people have died with coronavirus. That brings the total to, since the crisis began, to more than 46,000. And there have been 880 new confirmed cases. Now, to put the latest death total in context, yesterday, deaths reported 38. Wednesday, 83. Tuesday, 119. Today, 120. So bigger figures on Tuesday, today, smaller figures on Wednesday and Thursday. We will, of course, keep you up to date with all those figures as they come in. Well, Samaya Afsar lives and works in Bradford, one of the places hit by the new lockdown. The city has a Muslim population of around 25%, and she has had to cancel her Eid plans. She told me how she first heard the news.
9:30, a couple of minutes after it was announced, and we didn't get any more information, particularly about how the Bradford district would be affected until late this morning.
So tell me, after 9ish at night, did you do a ring round your family to try and get more information? What happened?
Yeah, so obviously there was a lot of confusion. There were lots of fierce messages across WhatsApp groups. There were lots of phone calls. Plans that had been in the making for weeks had been cancelled because obviously this is the biggest festival in the Muslim calendar. Not only that, we had a very subdued Ramadan, month of fasting, and a previous Eid celebration this year when there was a lockdown in place. And now it felt as though there were these relaxation measures, that we were being encouraged to go out more, that we would be able to kind of socially distance and follow the guidelines, but also celebrate the biggest festival in the calendar at the same time. But obviously that's not what's happened.
So how big had been the gathering that you were planning?
Not very big at all. We're quite a small family, but it would have been really nice to see my grandparents. It would have been really good to see extended members of my family who I've not seen for any period of time for about 5 months now. But I think what's been really, I guess, key for us is that we understand, obviously, that it's important to keep safe. It's important to make sure that we don't continue the spread of COVID-19 during this pandemic. But the timing and the application of these guidelines in particular have kind of speak to a slightly misguided approach on the part of the government. And lots of people have been questioning exactly why it had to happen, hours before Eid celebrations.
But as you said there, you do accept that from a scientific point of view, the idea of people meeting indoors for whatever reason, even if it's a celebration, that there is a risk of infection.
Well, I guess I would completely accept that. My background, I'm a scientist myself in a previous life, but what I would say is actually it's a group of households. If every single member, every single household in my family went to a restaurant across the road, for example, and decided to spend Eid there, we would be in an enclosed environment. We would also, it would be the same people in the same space. So this discrepancy, doesn't feel like it's about public health anymore. And some people are asking, is this something that has been intentionally done to blame Muslim communities?
Samaya Afzal. Vietnam has announced its first coronavirus deaths after an outbreak was detected in the city of Da Nang. The country had previously seen its zero death figure as a point of pride. It's only registered about 500 cases in total, but new infections have been detected in recent days, mostly in Da Nang. Infections have spread to 6 provinces. The death of 2 people comes as officials have closed bars and restaurants across the country and suspended large gatherings. Here's our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head.
Vietnam was able to get its COVID-19 infections under control very quickly after they started coming into the country in February. It has proved itself one of the most efficient. It hasn't done it through mass testing, it's done it through extremely rigorous contact tracing, massive public education, getting the whole population on board. It helps that it is effectively a communist-run country. The government is very strong, the local authorities are very strong, people do what they're told. But it has worked. And because they had no deaths, and they're almost unique in this country this size, having so few figures, such small numbers and no deaths, they did put that tremendous effort into keeping Stephen Cameron alive, really against the odds. Nobody else thought he'd survive, but this new outbreak caught them completely by surprise. They'd had no cases at all inside Vietnam for 99 days up until last Friday, a week ago. And they let almost no foreigners come into the country. Those who come in are very strictly controlled, so nobody knows where this new infection has come from. It was suddenly a man in the city of Da Nang was recorded. They were so astonished. They actually tested him 5 times because they couldn't believe it. But from that first infection, they've now had 80 new cases, more than 80 in a week. But the biggest number increase they've had since this started. And inevitably, once you start getting old people getting it, they had their first fatality. Symbolically, a big blow for them. And a worry for other countries like Thailand, where I am now. We've had no cases now for 60 days. They're very proud of that. But this is a reminder that even when you think you've beaten COVID-19, when you've closed your borders off, the virus can still flare up. And in this case, still nobody knows where it came from.
Jonathan Head there. One of Britain's most successful film directors, Sir Alan Parker, has died. He was 76. He started his career in television advertising and went on to direct films including Bugsy Malone, Midnight Express, Evita and The Commitments. David Sillito looks back at his career and a warning that this report does contain some flashing images.
1976, Bugsy Malone, a joyous gangster musical with a cast of children armed with splurge guns. The Commitments, the ups and downs of playing soul in Dublin.
Had to see if you could play before I pay for them.
Sick and tired of going to the funerals of black men who have been murdered by white men.
Mississippi Burning, an Oscar-winning thriller of racial injustice. You would be hard-pressed to see much that linked them, other than the name of the man who brought them to the screen, Alan Parker.
We see a different world, you know, whether it be, you know, from whatever country the film might have been about, you know, predominantly American cinema and British films, obviously. But it was just you know, just that magical place in the dark, and I think that I can't think of, you know, of anything in my childhood that actually excited me more than actually going to the movies.
He'd made his name making adverts. This working-class Londoner had left school and got a job in the post room and worked his way up.
Don't cry for me, Argentina.
30 years later, his adaptation of Evita, starring Madonna, won 5 Oscar nominations. And all this success came at a time when the British film industry was at its lowest ebb. His brilliance lay in his ability to switch styles, rooted in his love of the movie. Laughter, delight, surprise. It was all there, right at the beginning of the film that launched the career of one of Britain's great movie directors.
Sir Alan Parker, the acclaimed film director who's died at the age of 76. You're watching BBC News.
Hello. After a very hot Friday, the weekend is going to bring quite a cool down to the northwest of Europe because you can see these frontal systems pushing in from the northwest. The winds behind those weather fronts coming down from the northwest. Some much fresher air pushing in. So here goes our frontal system drifting eastwards as we head into Saturday. A band of clouds, some showery rain. I think some hefty downpours will move towards the far southwest of Norway. Ahead of that, there is still plenty of heat to be had. Cyprus and Turkey into the 30s or 40s Celsius. The odd shower drifting across the Balkans. Italy mainly fine at this stage. But our frontal system just causing a few showers to break out across parts of eastern France and Switzerland. Down towards Iberia, another hot day on Saturday, but a much, much cooler one for the British Isles. 25 degrees in London, down from the middle 30s on Friday afternoon, and that cooler air just continues to push in across the northwest as we head into Sunday. This band of rain moving through into Scandinavia, parts of Germany, down into the Alps, some heavy thundery downpours, cooler, fresher weather following on behind. Even Spain cooling off a little bit. Madrid 34 degrees on Monday, but in London and Paris temperatures are set to climb again as we head through next week. In Berlin, it's going to cool off a little bit as we head on into Monday. Plenty of sunshine in the forecast for Athens.
This is the time to see systematic reform when it comes to the culture and behavior of policing in America.
There needs to be laws in place. There needs to be policies in place. We have to look at the whole structure and system around law enforcement and change it.
To get that message across that we were trying to create inclusion here and unity to make everybody feel as one and have a great time.
And very much tired of this happening over and over and over again in the Black community.
If my big brother would have seen everything like this going on right now, he preached it a lot.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
I live by the exercise of the mind. I love the mind. I cannot pretend that I don't have a mind, and that my life is not the life of the mind. I cannot go to an ashram and pretend I am melting into the infinite. I cannot do a tribal dance with any conviction.
One of the important things to understand about Naipaul is that he was absolutely a snob, you know, a sort of cultural snob. In fact, he wrote an essay entitled "What's Wrong with Being a Snob?" And, you know, he's an elitist. Naipaul thinks he's good, he's Premier League. If he doesn't think you're Shakespeare, he doesn't really want to know you. You know, Naipaul is somebody who obviously believes in hierarchies. You've got to be good, you know? If you're not good, you're nothing. And you deserve to fall away for your culture to die.
The coronavirus has devastated America's economy. This week, government data will show it shrank by a record amount between April and June. We're looking at how a virus can wreak such havoc and how and if the world's largest economy can recover. That's here on BBC World News.
Opera, concerts, theatre. How do you stage a major music and arts festival at the time of coronavirus? Here in the city of Salzburg, they're about to find out. For more on this story, join me, Bethany Bell, on BBC World News.
This is BBC News with the latest headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. The UK Prime Minister puts the brakes on further easing of lockdown restrictions due to come into force in England tomorrow. Bowling alleys, ice rinks and casinos will now not open. Small wedding receptions will not be allowed either. Boris Johnson said it's necessary in order to deal with the rise in infections.
I won't stand by and allow this virus to threaten to cause more pain and more heartache in our country.
The UK's official coronavirus death toll has risen by 120 in the last 24 hours. That's a big increase on yesterday's total of 38 and Wednesday's of 83. It takes the entire total in this country past 46,000. More than 4 million people in northern England can no longer visit other people's homes or gardens after the sudden imposition of new restrictions.
It's just hard to know really how to move forward and how coming out of this lockdown is what's going to happen really.
The top infectious diseases expert in the United States tells lawmakers that US lockdowns have been less strict and less effective than those in Europe. After 3 months without any new infections, Vietnam now reports its first 2 deaths from COVID-19. And one of Britain's most acclaimed film directors, Sir Alan Parker, has died at the age of 76. Welcome back to BBC News. According to the latest UK figures, 120 more people have died with coronavirus. That brings the total number of deaths in the UK to 46,119. In terms of new cases, we've had 880 today. The UK's 7-day rolling average is 753. You can see from this chart that cases have been rising slightly in the past week, but scientists don't yet know whether that's more and better testing or the beginnings of the resurgence we've been seeing elsewhere in Europe. 24 areas are now on Public Health England's watch lists due to the rise in infection rates. Here's our science editor, David Shookman.
Relaxing the lockdown is not going to happen as quickly as many had hoped. We're not on the brink of returning to the toughest restrictions. The scale of the disease is too low for that. But the virus does seem once again to be reaching a growing number of people. The latest official analysis shows new infections in England rising from 2,000 a day at the end of June to 3,000 in mid-July to 4,200 more recently. And one government advisor speaking personally says he's concerned.
I think we need to be much more cautious. We need to adhere to best practice. And I do worry that if it gets out of control, it could trigger another second wave quite early, which we really don't want. And if this had happened in October, I think that would have been an unstoppable event.
We're nowhere near the scale of infections we saw at the height of the pandemic back in March and April. But there are now more than 20 areas of concern, including those in the northwest that had new restrictions imposed on them last night. Top of that list is Oldham, along with Trafford and Salford. Over the border, Wrexham has the highest rate of infections in Wales, with 61 cases per 100,000 people. In Scotland, with a far lower level of infections, Glasgow's had 3 new cases over the last 7 days. Likewise in Northern Ireland, there's a handful of cases in Lisbon and Castlereagh. This comes at a time of changing messages from the government on how to keep a safe distance and whether to stay at home. Experts in behaviour say a much clearer guide is needed.
The government strategy seems to be haphazard and responsive rather than strategic. It's leaving people confused as to what they should and shouldn't be doing and confused as to what's coming next.
One measure we will see more of is face coverings. They'll be required in more places. A reminder in these more nervous times of how until there's a vaccine, there aren't many ways to stop the virus from spreading. David Shookman, BBC News.
More now on England, where an easing of coronavirus restrictions due to come into effect tomorrow has been put on hold for at least 2 weeks. Boris Johnson said that it was time to squeeze the brake pedal because of a rise in infections, and that move means that close contact beauty services cannot reopen as planned. Bowling alleys and skating rinks will also have to stay shut. Well, Vanita Parti is the founder and CEO of Blink Brow Bar, which offers some of those close contact beauty services. Vanita Parti, thank you so much for joining us. That announcement from the Prime Minister came at about midday. Tell us how you reacted.
Well, we were all a little shocked, actually. I had my team on WhatsApp. We were all communicating with each other because we've worked extremely hard to get ready to open the doors tomorrow. And we just kept saying, it can't be true. It can't be true. We've got all our girls back. We've organised the rotas. We've got customers booked. This is our second full start. And we're completely devastated, and I don't know. This is going to have a terrible effect on our business because furlough is diminishing next month, and our customers are getting hugely frustrated.
You can see, though, some of the logic in the government's point that face-to-face contact in this pandemic is what causes risk, and face-to-face contact indoors is something that clearly the government feels has to be limited on scientific grounds.
I understand, but we offer very short treatments, 15 minutes. Our therapist wears a mask, our customer wears a mask, and we are one of the most hygienic sectors. You're allowed to sit in a pub, you're allowed to sit on a plane, you can go to the gym, and I went for a swim last week. So it's inconsistent in my view, and men can go and get their beards trimmed. It doesn't make sense, and I think that's what's the most frustrating thing about this.
Have you been able to make protests to anyone in government or the authorities?
I think that's the issue. Last time I wrote to our MP, and I have spoken to press, and the BBC have been amazing, but ultimately I need Boris Johnson to come down and get his eyebrows threaded and show him how safe we really are.
Right. I wonder, is that a hypothetical request or a real request? Sorry, I couldn't work out from your tone.
It's
a real request. Okay.
We are ready and waiting, and I would love someone to talk to us about whether we are safe and to come in and experience how we operate. We're the market leader in brows, and we wouldn't open our doors unless we felt that we were as safe as we can be, and a lot safer than sitting in a pub.
Vanita Parti, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, as lockdown easing is put on hold in England, people in the country who are at high risk from coronavirus will no longer be advised to shield as of tomorrow. Vince Main, who had a kidney transplant in 2013, has been shielding for several months now. He joins us. Hi, Vince. How does it feel that you might be getting back out into the world?
I don't think it feels significantly different, to be honest, because I can't see things changing rapidly for people like me. Because I don't think the risk has necessarily been averted significantly. I think some elements of it have, but I guess there's still a risk with a lot of people ignoring the social distancing rules and ignoring the face covering rules and so on. So I think it's not going to change massively, if I'm really honest, which is a shame.
Would you consider going out to get a pint of milk?
It is about sort of assessing the risk to yourself. So I had to go to the GPs today to pick up a prescription, had to get some petrol. So I did go to the garage, but at that point, the guy in the garage had a face mask put under his nose, so neither use nor ornament, as the guidelines would say. So you have to be very careful about things like that. So emergency types of visits, yes. Am I going to be going to supermarkets anytime soon? No.
What's been the hardest part of the last 4 months?
It has been hard, not leaving the house. I'm very fortunate we have a garden so I can get outside. I've got a bike so I can do some training on a turbo trainer and so on. So I know I'm very lucky. But it still does take an effect where the lack of social contact with people, and as much as you can do that on Zoom or on Teams or whatever, it's not the same as meeting somebody sort of in real life. So that has been hard. But it's a little bit like taking a plaster off. Relatively speaking, a few months is, it's difficult, but it's a short-term pain if we get rid of this and get the virus under control. If it continues to drag along, and I do have some sympathy with Anita and her issue around the mixed messaging, then it's going to be a much longer-term pain for everyone to bear, and that will be really, really difficult for a lot of people. So I think let's just get it sorted in the next few months, then we can move on, hopefully, once it's properly under control.
You mentioned the next few months. Psychologically, how long are you prepared to wait it out?
That's a good question. I think, again, I was very fortunate on my wait on the transplant list because my brother donated a kidney to me. There are people that sit on the transplant list for years waiting and waiting. So if it comes to it, we'll wait. I think people are experienced in that. Yes, it's tough, but it's got to be what it's got to be. So there's no point in rushing it. And especially from sort of our perspective where you are more at risk, you need to manage your own risk as well as you can. And if that means you wait a few extra months, so be it. It's just that putting deadlines on things doesn't help, I guess, in some respects, because you look forward to that deadline and then it gets shifted. So it's about having a bit more of an open mind about when that deadline or when that end point might come.
Vince Main, it's been great to speak to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
A teenager has been jailed for 16 years for the manslaughter of PC Andrew Harper, who died after being dragged for more than a mile behind their car in Berkshire last summer. His two passengers, who are 18, were each jailed for 13 years. Helena Wilkinson was in court. Her report does contain some flashing images.
Andrew and Lizzie Harper were married for less than a month when he was killed. Today she was in court with family to see those responsible jailed for their crimes. Jesse Cole, Henry Long and Albert Bowers. They had, during parts of the trial, laughed and joked.
I've got 4 masked men outside my house and they've got weapons. They're stealing my quad bike.
This is the 999 call about the theft of a quad bike that PC Harper had been responding to with a colleague. The officers soon came across the teenager's car. Jesse Cole quickly unhooked the bike. Through the rearview camera, you can see his legs as he tries to escape, followed by PC Harper, who got caught at that moment in the tow rope. Sentencing the teenagers, Mr. Justice Edis said they had killed a talented and brave young police officer who was going above and beyond his duty in order to provide a public service. PC Harper's widow, Lizzie Harper, read a victim impact statement to court. She said, 4 weeks was all I had to call him my husband, 4 weeks to be called his wife. My life often feels bleak, hopeless, irreparable. My desolate nights bring no rest, no time for reprieve from this utter turmoil. I will spend every day of the rest of my life with a hollowness that will never, ever be filled.
These are 3 people who I do not believe have ever shown an ounce of genuine remorse or contrition for their actions. They did their best to frustrate the police investigation.
The judge said there was nothing he could do to restore Andrew Harper to his loving wife or family, and they had the profound sympathy of the whole nation. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News.
Today is the 3rd hottest day ever recorded in the UK. Temperatures reached 37.8 degrees Celsius at Heathrow and 37.3 degrees Celsius in Kew Gardens. The hot weather has led to large crowds heading to beaches on the south coast of England. Brighton Council has asked people to stay away amid concerns social distancing was becoming impossible. Sarah Campbell reports.
After months of lockdown, it's hardly surprising that people have flocked to the beaches to cool off. From Bournemouth, along the south coast, to Brighton, making the most of the baking temperatures. Arriving in their thousands, day trippers described packed trains.
Oh, it was awful. Everyone was like sardines in a tin. Everyone's like, oh, don't touch the handrails, don't touch the buttons.
Oh, don't even start on that, mate. Like sardines, absolutely. Like sardines, don't do it. If you're planning on travelling by train, don't do it.
Everyone on the train, everyone's going home to somebody who might be vulnerable. I think it's disgraceful. Now I wish I'd never gone myself.
For the local businesses, today's crowds are welcome, but there's a balance to be struck. And by early afternoon, Brighton wasn't the only council asking if people weren't already there to stay away. Large numbers, went the warning, make it impossible to maintain physical distancing. For the lifeguard team trying to manage safety on the beaches, the pandemic has added an extra layer to their already busy workloads.
Older people, including myself, depending on what sort of bracket you want to put them in, are generally wiser and a bit more sensible than the young teenagers and the young 20-year-olds. So they're always going to be a little bit more pushy. And it's just trying to make them understand that it's still a pandemic, there's still people dying every day.
People across the UK have been making the most of the sunshine, heading to Blackpool's famous tower. In the Welsh capital, Cardiff, parks were used to cool off and chill out in. But how many people is too many? The police were out this afternoon on Portobello Beach near Edinburgh. The same was true on Bournemouth and Pool's crowded beaches. Enforcing the rules made less easy when the sun is shining and the sea is so inviting. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
I'm joined now by Councillor Phelan McCafferty, Green Party councillor and leader of Brighton and Hove Council. Councillor, great to have you with us. I see on Twitter you've asked people not from Brighton to stay away from Brighton this weekend. How do you plan to enforce this?
You're absolutely right. We're very concerned at the number of people who've travelled to the city already. And we're saying if you're not already here, please don't travel to the city today. There's very limited capacity on public transport, and residents of our city, first and foremost, need the space to socially distance. In terms of enforcement, we are working across all the partners in the city. That includes Sussex Police, it includes the rail companies, as well as the City Council. There is a coherent plan in place to ensure that there is safe social distancing.
Do you, as leader of the council, have authority to tell the police to enforce this?
The police operation is, of course, will be their own affair. We are liaising with them and all of the other blue light agencies in the city, and together there will be a coherent plan. And that coherent plan will, of course, take into all of the eventualities that may happen tomorrow, including those things that we may or may not want.
We have seen councillors in some parts of England literally standing on beaches, walking from person to person, saying, please leave if you're not from here locally. Do you plan to do that?
I will be on the beach tomorrow, of course, and I will be helping to get across the message on social media and to people in the city as well, because this isn't just about tourism, and it really pains me actually to be talking about this in this way, because we rely so heavily on tourism. But the reality is that whether it's our residents or whether it's our traders, their safety and their health comes first. And we really stress that in order for our city to carry on doing so well, we the lower end of the watch list of local councils for outbreaks. But keeping everyone safe will only be possible if we continue that focus on combating the virus.
I understand official Pride events to celebrate Pride had already been cancelled, but are you worried that unofficial Pride parties might still go ahead in some places in Brighton?
There is a promoted unofficial event that is being promoted on social media. Again, the plan that we have drawn up with the other emergency services in the city means that we are planning for all the outcomes tomorrow, and we'll be working very closely with all of the emergency services on that. If there are indeed events, we will have marshals in place who will work alongside the police, and we will be making sure that whatever happens tomorrow, people will remain safe.
Councillor Phelan McCafferty in Brighton, thank you so much. A judge in the United States has authorised the release of documents relating to a civil case against Ghislaine Maxwell, who's awaiting trial on charges of trafficking underage girls for her former boyfriend and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. She denies the charges. Nick Bryant reports from New York.
This much-anticipated batch of new documents includes an email to Ghislaine Maxwell written in 2015 by her former boyfriend Jeffrey Epstein, advising her to return to high society. "You have done nothing wrong, and I would urge you to start acting like it," Epstein wrote, following a request from Miss Maxwell to downplay their one-time relationship. "Go outside, head high, not as an escaping convict. Go to parties, deal with it." The documents also include a deposition from Virginia Giuffre, which includes her claim that she was trafficked by the couple and ordered to have sex with Prince Andrew, an allegation he denies. In it, she also accuses Ghislaine Maxwell of engaging in sexual contact with girls as young as 15. "My instruction from them," she said of Epstein and Miss Maxwell, "was the younger the better." The British socialite has pleaded not guilty to the charges against her.
The Palace has announced the Prime Minister's honours list. The honours include one for former Chancellor Kent Clarke, Philip May, the husband of Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, the newspaper proprietor Evgeny Lebedev, and the former cricketer and Brexit supporter Sir Ian Botham. There's even one for the Prime Minister's own brother, the former Minister Joe Johnson. Right. The virtual Bafta TV Awards are taking place tonight, and we have already had a few winners. Scott Bryan is a TV critic and co-host of Must Watch podcast on BBC 5 Live. He has been watching the Baftas very closely tonight. Scott, who's winning?
I mean, it's a really interesting spread. I've never been in a scenario before where I've had to comment about an award show that's literally happening behind me on a TV. But essentially, it's been a strong night so far for Fleabag. Sian Clifford has won. Over actually Phoebe Waller-Bridge, of course, who was the hot-tipped favourite, being the creator of Fleabag. It's been a big success also for Strictly, winning entertainment programme. There's also been a big hit for Race Across the World. That's a huge hit where teams of two try to get from one side of a continent to another. And actually, it won for Series 1, when Series 2 has been a big hit under lockdown. So it's really shown some momentum. But there's awards happening all the time, literally. The Misadventures of Ramesh Ranganathan is just won an award just now.
Do you know, I can almost see them in the reflection of your glasses. Are they giving? How are they giving the awards? Physically, virtually?
So there's what they've coined a virtual ceremony, which is something I've not had before. So essentially, you're seeing people who are literally reacting live on Zoom, as we are, whilst there are other images of Getty images and so forth next to them on the screen because the actor or the director or whoever is unavailable. And then the idea is that they would either throw to a live interview if the person is there, and if they're not there, they would show a pre-recorded acceptance speech. But the weird thing is, all of the nominees who weren't there have recorded them. So there will be a lot of acceptance speeches.
I've never heard that before. What, that you have to pretend you might have won, and then do we ever get to see the speeches, the winning speeches?
No. Well, unless
there's
a problem. Unless there's a problem. I mean, you know, we've been there before with the Oscars. We don't want to do that
Moonlight,
again.
we don't want that again.
No, absolutely not.
If they're having to give a speech in Zoom, they might be like you in their kitchen. How are they going to get that emotion that we really want as TV viewers, to see them crying while they thank every single person they've ever met?
Well, you know what the weird thing is? The fact that they are reacting live on Zoom provides something weirdly intimate. So, for example, just before I chatted to you, Sian Gifford was accepting her role of Fleabag. She was legitimately in tears. Naomi Ackie won for a show called The End of the F World, and she was completely like you get to see, because it's within a small screen rather than them in a huge audience, a real kind of intimacy and a real rawness you wouldn't normally expect. And I think that's been a real surprise. That you sort of wonder, going forward in future awards, how they'll start to incorporate some of the things to sort of make it a bit more interesting this year.
Now, let's talk about the kind of range of nominees we've had. Has it been a sufficient range? Are there criticisms about diversity on this year's nominees and also the award winners?
Yeah, there has been. I mean, not as much of the film awards. The film awards was certainly under the scrutiny in terms of whether it was having enough representation. But there are some categories that I think have been under the scope in terms of whether they could have been more reflective. there's been more of a focus by Bafta themselves in the last few months of having diversity quotas and trying to introduce new measures to make it going forward as a sort of, we're hearing you. And it is a wider issue within the TV industry, I think, in terms of trying to make sure that there's enough representation and, in terms of the right stories being told that reflects the whole of the UK. I think it's also a weirdness in terms of these awards that a lot of the programmes are actually from last year. So, it's essentially from January to December, and we're celebrating them in July, which is
That's a
more
long
than 6
time.
months.
Fleabag feels like quite a long time ago.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's even weirder. Brexit and Uncivil War is a nominee. That's done by James Graham. That aired in, I think, 2018. So
right. But they get an award in 2020. Well, lucky them.
Yeah, very much so. If he wins, unless he already has.
Unless, there's already been that other speech. Has there been any mention of how on earth TV is going to continue in these current conditions? We've watched everything that must have been filmed now. How are people going to carry on and film?
So, I mean, there's been many sorts of ideas that have been thrown into the mix. A lot of shows have started again in terms of studio programmes without an audience. We've also had much more of procedures done by different channels in terms of trying to ensure that everything is safe on set as physically possible. But we're having an issue now where, of course, a lot of dramas are incredibly expensive, and those are the ones that really audiences want. But it's not necessarily going to be that much flexibility in them being made right now. So I think a lot of big productions are kind of holding back for as long as they can before resuming, because they don't know what's going to happen in the same way that we all don't know what's going to happen, really, as we head towards winter.
And that is where we must end it. Scott, I will let you get back to watching the BAFTAs. Scott Brown, thank you so much. And that's pretty much it from us. Do stay with BBC News.